Hello students, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Idris Amsuya. I'm here to give you a revision lesson in History Paper 2, and our topic of today is the rise of, socialism. Our previous topic was, our previous study concentrated on the development of socialist theory, which was the first subtopic in this topic. Today we are going to look at the we are going to look at the October Revolution and its impact on the world history. My dear students, this subtopic has got some specific objective. And the first objective is analyzing the causes of the Russian October Revolution. And the second objective is analyzing the effect of Russia revolution to the Russians and the world. These are the objectives, and make sure that at the end you are able to achieve these two specific objectives. But also, my students, we have got some questions to this topic, this subtopic, and you have to make sure that at the end you are able to attempt these two questions. One, analyze the causes for the Bolshevik Revolution and show the effect of the Bolshevik Revolution on Africa. The second is why socialist revolution did not occur first in Western Europe as predicted by Dr. Karl Marx. These are our two questions, and so make sure that at the end of this lesson of today you are able to attempt these two questions. Now we are going to another very important part of our discussion in this topic of the rise of socialism, and we move to Russia Revolution of 1917. Russia Revolution took place in October 1st, 1917. October 1st, 1917, which of course is known the Great October Revolution. And the Russian Revolution was inspired by the writings of Dr. Karl Marx, who wrote about the socialist revolutions in a series of books which were called Das Kapital. Das Kapital in German, in English means the capital. And he explained about the capitalism and the crisis that capitalism produced. So Marx said the more the development of capitalism, the more the suffering of the workers and the nearer the revolution. And above all, Marx said, what the capitalists produce out of the exploitation, as we have said earlier, it is nothing but to prepare their own grave diggers. My dear students, Marx had predicted revolution to occur first in Britain and Germany, because at that time he was writing, these two countries had already reached the highest stage of capitalism. So he believed that revolution can occur in a country which has achieved a highest level of capitalism, because in that country exploitation is very high and suffering of the workers is at the maximum. This is what Marx believed. My dear students, let's now move to Russia Revolution. What are the causes of the Russia Revolution? Russia Revolution was caused by many things, but the first cause is the bad czarist government. The government of Tsar was very bad, as we are going to see. Russia was ruled by Tsar. Tsar is like when you speak to other countries, king. And the last two Tsars were very much unpopular. We are talking of Alexander III and Nicholas II. Alexander III and Nicholas II. These Tsars were very, they were very poor leaders. And these people led the country. And in fact, they wanted Russia to become as powerful at the time when Russia was under Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. At that time, Russia, in fact, was very powerful. Russia was very powerful. So these two leaders wanted Russia to become as powerful at the time when it was under Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. During this time, Russia was able to expand and conquer some other European countries and expand their borders. They expand their borders to become one of the largest countries in Europe at that time. So these people wanted at least to make their country become as strong at this time, because they were growing to be, they were becoming more and more unpopular. So in order to make themselves popular, they started to introduce some of the programs, including what was called pogroms. Pogroms was the program which was introduced by Tsar Nicholas II, of course, eliminating the Jews, killing the Jews. And a lot of Jews were killed between 1881 to 1917. And also there was Bloody Sunday because people were demonstrating, demanding for bread. So a lot of people were killed in Blood Sunday, and that was 1905. And also there were new regulations on trade, church, and medias were introduced in Russia. Regulations are used in trade to control people. People were forced to write, to praise the the czars, I mean, and so on and so forth. The church, the Russian church, which is the Russian Orthodox Church, church was associated with czar. That means it was like trying to build what is called the absolute monarchy system, to reintroduce monarchy system in, in Russia. So for that case, because of everything which was going on, in fact, people were tired of this czarist government. As a result, they started to support revolution. But most important, the wife of Tsar Nicholas II was called the Tsarina Alexandra. Tsarina Alexandra was also very much interfering in the affair of the state. So people were tired of that government, and that's why they supported the socialist revolution of October 1917. The second point is the effect of First World War. Russia was very much affected by First World War. She went to First World War, first of all, and prepared. They went to First World War to fight. They had 6.5 million soldiers, but they went to fight war with 4.5 million rifles. So you can imagine you are going to fight war, World War, against the very powerful country like Germany with the number of weapons which were fewer compared to the number of soldiers. That is something very strange. And also during the war, there was not enough food to supply the army. There was not enough food to supply the army. It was very strange. So soldiers, sometimes they were running away from the, from the war front because of shortage of food. So you can see. And most important, the socialists, on the other hand, they were convincing the Russian people that there was no need of fighting that war because that war was pure and typical imperialistic in nature. And Russia at that time was not an imperialist state. She was just on the transformation from agrarian state to an industrial state. So she was not an imperialist state. So why should they fight that war? So it's because of that that a lot of people wanted Russia to withdraw from the war. And unfortunately, Nicholas II, he didn't want to withdraw his country from the war. So for that case, people supported the revolution. And you can see this picture. Most strange, after this, Tsar Nicholas II believed that he is growing unpopular. Then he decided to go himself to war in 1916. To go himself to war in 1916 as a way of making himself popular. That people start to look at him as the hero of the country because he went to fight war. People were, people were complaining that their children, their fathers, their brothers are dying in the war while leaders are relaxing in Moscow. So to show the people that he's a real patriot, he decided to go to war himself, and that was 1916. But remember, back in the Kremlin, he left his wife Tsarina Alexandra to rule the country. And you can't imagine, he went to war to fight against Germany in the front line, and he left back his wife Tsarina Alexandra, who was a German. So he had a German wife. So he went to fight the German, and he left his wife back, who is a German. You can imagine what was likely to happen. So, my dear students, this is what we can say regarding the first point. And this picture also shows that the Russians, in just two battles, the Battle of Tannenberg and the Battle of, the Battle of Masurian Lakes in August, just in 1 month, a lot of Russians were killed. In fact, 500,000 Russians were killed in just 1 month of August. You can imagine. So Russia lost a lot of people during the war, and that was making the government of Nicholas II very much unpopular, but also the socialists who were opposing the war, they were becoming more popular one day after the other. My dear students, the third point is the rising cost of living among the Russian and inadequate food supply. The cost of living was increasing. The price of life, the price of food, for instance, increased 500 to 700% from 1914 to 1917. You can imagine 500 to 700% in just these years of war. I mean, you can imagine. But also, Not only that, there was shortage of food. The government of Russia introduced food rationing. Unfortunately, there was no food to ration. And this is what led to the February Revolution, which in fact ousted Nicholas II, and he brought the new government, which was led by Alexander Kerensky. I shall come to see about it later. But this also made the government of Russia to become so unpopular because there was no food to ration, and they introduced food rationing. In fact, this February Revolution, it started as a bread riot, People were rioting for bread, as a bread riot. So, my dear students, this is another point. Another point is the Russian winter of 1916. Russian winter of 1916 was said to be extraordinary. It was extraordinary. That among the records of winter in Russia, that was extraordinary. And because of that winter, soldiers were running away from the front line, trying to go back to their village because of that extreme winter, that at least they can be able to save their life. Going back to their village, they found that there was nothing in their village that will help them to take care of that winter, including the heavy coats, the blanket, the fuel, and so on and so forth. So what happened is those soldiers who were running away sometimes, they were stealing people's property, and so on and so forth. This also contributed to the collapse of the government and the rise of socialist government. As you can see, my dear students, this shows one village in February 1916. You can see this is winter. Everything here is almost ice. And these are the people who are trying to, to move. Some of them, the dogs and animals, you can see they are stuck because of that winter. My dear students, when you speak of winter in Russia, it's not something you can understand easily. Many people were defeated because of Russian winter. You go back and look at Napoleon Bonaparte, was defeated in Moscow because of winter. Even Adolf Hitler was defeated by the Russians during Second World War because of winter. So Russian winter is not something which is very easy to understand. It's very, very extreme winter, especially that one of 1916. Another point is the problem of refugees. People were running away from, from the war front, trying to go back to the other areas. But they ran from the Western Front, go to the Eastern Party. They found there was no food, there was no nothing, and the people were dying of famine. So it brought a lot of confusion to people. And the government of Russia, under Tsar Nicholas II, was not doing anything to help the people. So that has culminated for the rise of the revolution sentiments. It led to the rise of the socialist movements in in Russia, and so paved the way to the revolution in 1916. Another point is the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. Russo-Japanese War. Russo here, we are talking of Russia and Japan. The war was fought between Russia and Japan. And the reasons for their war, it was to annex Korea and Manchuria. And the Russians believed that that war is going to be very easy because Japan was considered not only as a small country, but also it was not a European country. And historically, it was believed at that time that there was no country which has ever defeated a European nation at that time, that an Asian country has never defeated a European country. So that's what they believe. And they believe that their war against Japan is going to be an easy one. But unfortunately, out of the expectation, Russia was defeated by Japan. Tsar Nicholas II expected to exploit that victory against the Japanese and make himself popular. But instead of making himself popular, he became more and more weaker because of that defeat. And the people were despising him, that he has become one of the most weak Tsar ever to rule Russia. So you can see that also paved the way to the Russia Revolution, because even those people who wanted their country to become an imperialist nation, they were very much discouraged by the Russian defeat in 1905 by the Japanese. Another point here is the influence of socialist doctrine by Dr. Karl Marx. Karl Marx has written a lot of books, as we have said, and all those books were explaining about how to establish a socialist society. And people like Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, people like Leon Trotsky, Bukharin, and Joseph Stalin, they took that idea of Karl Marx, translated it, and put it into practice. That's why later we came to have what is called Marxism-Leninism. That means some of the things which Marx has introduced, they were changed a little by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, and he produced Marxism-Leninism, and so used them successful to bring up the Russian Revolution of 1917. So, and the most important thing which has so inspired, it was an article which was written by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, V.I. Lenin, you know, in the socialist newspaper, which is called the Pravda. Pravda. And that one is called the aprothesis, the aprothesis. Aprothesis, or the apro article, because it was written on April 1917. And this is considered very important because it encouraged, and it encouraged the workers, it encouraged the peasants in in Russia to start to support the socialist revolution. In fact, remember, that article was written after Nicholas II was already overthrown earlier in February 1917. And in his article he said, "Lend to the tillers, power and bread to the Soviet." My dear students, I mean, as you can see, lend to the tillers, power and bread to the Soviet. That means land is going to go to the tillers. People who till the land, they have to consider that the land belongs to them. And the Soviet means the workers are going to be given power to rule the country. This is what V.I. Lenin meant. And those words were so encouraging to the workers, and as a result, they supported revolution. Another point here is the February Revolution. As I said earlier, the Revolution of October was presided by the February Revolution. There was revolution on February, and this February Revolution, ousted Nicholas II, was abducted, and he was removed from the throne. Nicholas II was removed from the throne, and his place was taken by, a provisional government which was led by Alexander Kerensky. And that government did not last long, as I said, because it came to be overthrown on 1917 on October. So the Mensheviks recognized the new government, but the Bolshevik, of course, rejected. So you can see that was a very good tactic to be used by the socialists or the Bolshevik. Why have they rejected? They knew that these people are going to fail as long as they rejected to implement some of the important ideas. One, it was to withdraw Russia from the First World War. Second, it was to deal with the problem of shortage of food. And the third, it was to carry out a land reform. They never introduced these three things. And so, for V.I. Lenin and his supporters, they knew that let us give time to the, to this new government, because this new government, it is going to fail. Obviously, it's going to fail as long as they do not want to implement the three things. And of course, what they thought came true, that in October 1917, that government collapsed and the new government of the Bolsheviks came to power. My dear students, as you can see, this is the picture and explanations that show the February Revolution. It is February Revolution, but according to Russian calendar, it is March 1917. And this is, and as you can see, Nicholas II gave the throne, abdicated, and under the leader of Duma. And this is Nicholas II. The provisional government failed to win support from the people. Why? Of course, I've said they did not introduce reform. That's one. Two, they did not solve the problem of shortage of food. And third, they did not, they did not introduce the land reform that will guarantee the peasants with enough land. So it's because of that this government of Alexander Kerensky has to fail as well. My dear students, let's now look at the effect of Russian Revolution. What is the effect of Russian Revolution? let's now look at the effect of Russia revolution to the Russians. How Russian people were affected by the Russia revolution. The first effect of Russia revolution to the Russians is the outbreak of Russian civil war. Civil war broke out in Russia between the Red Army and the White Army. The Red Army was the Bolshevik army, and the White Army was those people who were overthrown, led by Alexander Kerensky, and they were supported by United States of America, Britain, France. They wanted to, they were supporting them first because they were discouraged. They were disappointed by Russia withdrawing the First World War and sign a non-aggression, and sign a treaty with the Germans. But also, they were discouraged by the revolution which brought socialism in Soviet, in Russia. So that is the first effect of Russia revolution on Russians. The second is the emergence of USSR. In 1918, the Bolshevik Party was renamed the Communist Party, and Soviet Union changed its, and Russia changed its name from being Russia to become the USSR, the Union of Socialists of Soviet of Russia. So officially, it came to be known as the USSR, and that is 1918. The third is that the end of autocratic rule under Tsarists and that of Alexander Kerensky. There was the end of Tsardom in Russia. Remember, Russia was ruled by the series of Tsars for quite a long time. So that marked the end of Tsardom in Russia, and also that government of Alexander Kerensky, which was overthrown, and and paved the way to the emergence of a new socialist government, which was led by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, a communist government which was led by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Another point is the industrial growth and economic development. Russia, Russia introduced a 5-year development plan, and they launched some industrial economic development through, it is 3 years economic development plan after the Russian Civil War and the death of Lenin in 1924. Another point is the abolition of social classes. There were social classes in USSR, and those social classes were abolished. We are talking of the capitalistic class. We are talking of the feudal class. We are talking of the peasant class, and so on and so forth. So, aristocratic class. All those classes were abolished. All those classes were abolished, and Russia was established as a classless society which follows socialism. Another point is abolition of freedom of worship. Remember, the major church in Russia was Orthodox Church. So that church was abolished together with all other religion, and they introduced, and this is because of the Karl Marx's principle, which believed that religion is another tool of exploitation, and that it leads to what he called a psychological alienation. So religion were abolished, and also freedom of worship was also abolished in USSR. Another point is the introduction of education reform. Educational reforms were introduced, at least to make the children at the school to read about socialism and to abandon the reading of capitalism, to read about the new socialist government and abandon the read of those monarchy leaders of the past, and so on and so forth. So some changes were introduced in educational system of USSR. Another point is the expansion of Russian territory. Russian territory was increased. It increased in size during the Russian Civil War. They were able to conquer some new lands and expand their territories, and so on and so forth. Another point is Russia withdrew from the First World War by signing treaty with the Germans. Of course, this is what the socialists have promised. V.I. Lenin signed the treaty to withdraw Russia from the First World War immediately after revolution. And I said earlier, this is probably one of the things which provoked the Western countries which were fighting against the, against the Germans and her allies and so on. So that is another effect. Let's now move to the effect of Russia revolution in the world. How the world was affected by the Russia revolution. The first way is the spread of communism in the world. The spread of communism in the world. The communism, remember, started in USSR in 1917, and in 1949 it went to China. 1959 it went to, it went to Cuba, and then 1955 to Vietnam. 1954 to Korea, and it kept on spreading even to African countries like Mozambique, Angola. They used to follow communism of the either Russian type or the Chinese type, and so on and so forth. So there were spread of communism in the world. It started with one country, but it kept on spreading to different parts of the world. Another point is division of the world into two blocks. World was divided into two antagonistic block. We are talking of the socialist block and the capitalist block. My dear students, here we are talking about the emergence of Cold War. Remember, we said earlier that Cold War has emerged. Cold War has emerged with the emergence of two conflicting ideologies. And that one ideology came to existence during the Russian Revolution. My dear students, another point is decolonization of the third world countries. USSR was supporting decolonization of some of the third world countries, because they wanted to expand socialism. They wanted to establish some countries as their satellite, and so on and so forth. Another point is the emergence of armed race and the Cold War. Of course, this one I've already said it, during, when I mentioned about the emergence of two conflicting ideology, and the emergence of two conflicting blocks. My dear students, another point is the emergence of interstate war and civil war to some of the third world countries. Those wars were ideologically motivated because of the emergence of socialism, and the Americans, on the other hand, were supporting either rebels or government which was anti-socialist. And as you can see, there were different kind of civil wars all over the world which were ideologically motivated. War that would have never occurred probably if there was no socialism, which was brought into being by the Russian Revolution of 1917. My dear students, let's now break for a while and come back for the questions. Welcome back, my students. Just as what we said in the beginning of our lesson of today, that you have to make sure that at the end of this lesson, you are able to attempt some questions, the questions that I gave you. Of course, with some other questions which come from this subtopic. My dear students, the first question that I gave you, in which I believe you can answer it, and I believe that you have the answers already written, based on what we have discussed, what we have gone through already. Let's now look at our question. The first question is, analyze the causes of the Bolshevik Revolution and show the effect of the Bolshevik Revolution on Africa. First of all, my dear students, you have to know, what do we mean by Bolshevik Revolution? And when the Bolsheviks was referring to those people who were fighting, those people who were the socialists, the communists in Russia. Before they were called the communists, they used to call themselves Bolsheviks. In fact, if you read, you will find there were Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. So the Bolsheviks were the socialists, and that's what we are referring. So it's like saying, analyze the causes of the communist revolution and show the effect of the communist revolution on Africa. So the question now, I think, is very open and very simple. My dear students, let's now look at the causes. The first cause of the Bolshevik Revolution or Russia Revolution, it is the effect of First World War. You know, my dear students, how Russia was affected by First World War. First of all, because of First World War, the Russian people had suffered a lot. They went to war, first of all, because of war, there were a lot of things, and that include things like unemployment. A lot of Russian people were unemployed. Why were they unemployed? Because some industries were destroyed, some farms were destroyed, but also because of war situation, the Russian people could not go out in their day-to-day production. So for that case, a lot of things occurred here. A lot of things happened. People were starving. So it's because of that that people demanded some changes. And most important, people wanted their country to withdraw from the First World War. But unfortunately, Tsar Nicholas II, who was the leader of Russia at that time, rejected to pull out his country out of First World War. But on the other hand, the Bolsheviks, led by V.I. Lenin and his colleague, they were also trying to convince people that they didn't see any reason why Russia should go to war, because that First World War was imperialistic in nature, and Russia was not an imperialist nation. So it was as if Russia went to war for other nations, particularly the British and the French, who were fighting in the same ally. So people believed the communists, people believed the Bolsheviks, and as a result, they have to support the revolution. The second point here, my dear students, as you can see, is bad Tsarist government. The government of Tsar was very bad. Here we are speaking of the last two Tsars especially. We are talking of Alexander III, and also we are talking about Nicholas II. These two leaders were very bad. In fact, they were autocratic rulers, They did not allow democracy. Even when they introduced democracy, like what was done by Nicholas II, he introduced democracy. He introduced the Duma, you see, and people, introduced the Duma, and unfortunately, when Duma started to exercise the democracy they were given, including rejected some of the issues brought by Nicholas II to the Duma, then Nicholas II decided to dismiss the Duma, you see. So you introduce democracy, and after democracy started to be exercised, you abolish democracy. So because of this, then many people in Russia were very angry with that government of Tsar. But most important, as we have said, Nicholas II, trying to make himself popular, he went to war. And what did he do? He left his wife back in the Kremlin to lead the country. And his wife, remember, was German, and he went to war to fight against the German. What do you expect, my dear students? In fact, what happened was a disaster, because that Tsarina Alexander, she didn't know how to rule the country. So things were moving from bad to worse. By the time Nicholas II came back from the war, the situation was so worse. The situation has moved from, the situation was so worse. So because of this, then, a lot of people supported revolution. They wanted some changes. My dear students, another thing here is the problem of refugees. A lot of people were running away from the war front to go to, to go to the areas where they believe their life is going to be safe. Unfortunately, you go to those areas and you find there was no food, there was no clothes, and so on and so forth. So people also wanted some changes, because all the blames were put to government, that their government was not doing anything to help the people taking care of those, solving those problems. That is another cause, my dear students. Another thing is increasing cost of living. Cost of living was very increasing, was very highly increasing in Russia. For instance, during the war, there was the increase of cost of living from 500% to 700%. You can imagine. It increased by 500% to 700% in just that period, in just that few period of war. So cost of living was increasing, but also most important, there was no food. And government of Russia at that time introduced what was called food rationing, but there was no food to ration. There was no food to ration. And in fact, we shall come to see later, this is exactly what contributed to February Revolution, because of increasing cost of living among the people. In Petrograd, for instance, what is called Moscow, the situation was so worse. My dear students, another point is the Russian winter of 1916. Russian winter of 1916. The Russian winter of 1916, we said, my dear students, was extraordinary. Was extraordinary in the sense that Russia, for quite a long time, they have never witnessed such a very severe winter. And unfortunately, people who were running away from the war area, people were running away from their areas because of winter. They go to another areas. They found there was nothing which could help them to take care of that winter. Remember, take care of winter, you need some fuel, you need some heavy coats, you need some blankets, and so on. And government could not provide all those things. So people were suffering, people were dying because of that winter, and government was not doing anything. And remember, this led to revolution because all the blames were put to the government. That the government of Russia was irresponsible. It couldn't provide it couldn't provide enough facilities to help people taking care of that winter. Another point here, my dear students, is Russo-Japanese War, which broke out between Russia and Japan from 1904 to 1905. In fact, this Tsar Nicholas II, he wanted to make himself popular. He wanted to make himself popular by starting war with Japan, believing that if he succeed to conquer Japan, and in fact he succeed to conquer Manchuria, which by that time was which at that time was also wanted by Japan, then probably he will make himself very, very much popular, the way Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, who once ruled Russia as the very powerful Tsar and Tsarina. In fact, things did not turn out the way he wanted. But why? Because Russia was defeated in that Russo-Japanese war. And he wanted to become popular, but at the end of the war, he ended up being most unpopular leader, most unpopular Tsar, in Russia. So because of what I've said then, people wanted some changes because they believe that not only that this Tsar is a bad leader, but also is making their country to become weak. Remember, Japan is an Asian country, Russia is a European country. So Russia became the first European country to be defeated by an Asian country. That was very strange. Another point is the role of Marx and Lenin. We have said about it, that the writings of Dr. Karl Marx has inspired the revolution, especially in what he said, in what he said, workers should have to join together for revolution because they have nothing to lose except their chain. So you can see, my dear students, all these things has contributed to revolution. Another thing is Federal Revolution, my dear students. I already said that Alexander Kerensky came to power because of that revolution, which of course did not last longer, because in October 1st, 1917, V.I. Lenin led the Bolsheviks to revolution of October 1917. Let's now look at the effect of this revolution in Africa. This is very clear, my dear students, decolonization of Africa. You know how Soviet Union has supported decolonization of Africa, supported liberation movements. We have got some liberation movements, like in Angola and Mozambique. People were fighting for independence. They were getting material and moral support from USSR. The rise of African socialism. We have got African socialism. For instance, different brands of African socialism. There is what we call African socialism as introduced by Kwame Nkrumah. Socialism and self-reliance, ujamaa na kujitegemea in Tanzania, you can see, my dear students. This also, we have borrowed some of the elements from the Russian Revolution. There is humanism in Zambia, common man charter, negritude, as it was introduced by Dr. Leopold Sedar Senghor of Senegal, and so on. So all this explain, about the effect of Russian Revolution on Africa. My dear students, also extension of financial and technical aid. African countries were getting some technical and financial aid from USSR. Remember, also used to get some educational support from USSR. Patrice Lumumba International University in Moscow. It used to receive students from third world countries, including African countries. There is this question of Cold War. Cold War, of course, started because of the emergence of two ideological differences. One ideology was brought by Russian Revolution, and African countries were affected by this Cold War in one way or another. Remember, we spoke about the issue of proxy war which were fought by some African countries, either interstate war or civil war in Africa. We have the war in Angola, war in Mozambique. We have war in Somalia. All of these wars were caused by the Cold War. The spread of Marxism. Some African countries opted to become the Marxists. They followed Marxism, like Angola and Mozambique and so on. My dear students, let's now come to the second question. Why the socialist revolution did not occur first in Western Europe as predicted by Dr. Karl Marx? Marx predicted that it's going to occur first in Europe, but it didn't. Rather, it occurred in USSR, a country which was not industrial country compared to Britain and France, where Dr. Karl Marx has predicted that revolution is going to occur there. The first reason, my dear students, is colonial exploitation. Marx believed that the more exploitation, the nearer the revolution. But unfortunately, these countries they come to a time when they realize that they should not continue to exploit their own people because of fear of revolution. So they switched. Instead of exploiting their people, they just went in different parts of the world and started to exploit other people by establishing colonies. So colonial exploitation then has replaced the workers' exploitation at home. So that, to some extent, has helped to avoid the possibility of revolution. Another point here is the strong liberal democracy. They introduced democracy which is very strong, And that democracy which has been introduced has allowed people to express their feeling, people to choose leaders, people to freedom of movement, freedom of assembly and so on. In fact, people have the freedom to criticize their leaders, people have the freedom of movement, people have the freedom of expression and so on. So for that case, when people are suffering, then they have a place, they have a venue to express about their suffering. And sometimes they can be held through democracy and so on. So this also helped a lot to avoid the possibility of revolution in those advanced countries of Western Europe. Another point here is the role of trade unions. The trade unions have played a very significant role to changes and so to prevent the possibility of revolution in these countries. Another thing is the welfare system. Welfare system was established to provide some food and other supplies to people. And because of that welfare system, which include free education, which include include free money to people who are employed, like the case of Britain, where they introduced the dole money under the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, which was supported by the Unemployed Beneficiaries Act number 40 in Britain. So people are getting money without working. In the United States, for instance, they came to introduce that system during the New Deal. So this also has helped a lot to avoid the possibility of revolution. My dear students, another point is the strength of capitalist government. Capitalist government is very strong, and when the workers are planning to overthrow that government, the government also is planning to stay in power. They always want to maintain their status quo. So this also is one of the things which has contributed to revolution not to occur in Britain or German, but rather occur in USSR, a country which was not predicted by Dr. Karl Marx. The last point, my dear students, is improvement of technology. Improvement of technology also has contributed to revolution not to occur in these countries, because the more the improvement of technology, the more the more exploitation decreases. Let's take, for example, long working hours. With technology being discovered, you cannot make people to work for long hours because there is technology which is going to work for that long hours. But also the number of workers are reduced in the industries because of improvement of technology. My dear students, now I know you have the answers to these questions, and you can answer these questions, but also together with some other questions which might also come from this topic. So for now, my dear students, let's call the end to this, to this lesson of today. My dear students, let's meet next time, and our next lesson will be also in this topic of the rise of socialism, and we'll focus on the Chinese Revolution and its impact on the world, as well as the fall of USSR. So my dear students, let's now call the end to our discussion of today. Let's meet next time. Thank you very much for watching and listening. Goodbye.